Hello everyone and welcome to the Green Man channel. I hope you're doing good and well. So it's time for the first episode of a three-part mini-series I'm doing on this channel talking about albums that shaped my musical taste from my teenage years going into my adult years. And for this first episode we're talking about albums that were specifically released during the years between 2000 and 2004. And I'm also going to give each one of these albums, I've got 8 albums here that I'm talking about, I'm going to give each one an impact score. That impact score is going to be out of 10. So 10 means that I think the album had, the maximum impact it could have had on my musical taste, and it really shaped what I listened to from that point onwards. And obviously, albums with a lower impact score are going to be ones that maybe still influenced me in some way, had some sort of an impact on me, but it was maybe less than those that I would score, say, a 9 or a 10 out of 10 for impact. I'm going to start here with an album which was a complete game changer for me. I'll be very surprised if any of you are surprised to see this on this list and to see me talk about this. This is, of course, Linkin Park's seminal album, their debut album, Hybrid Theory, released on the 24th of October 2000. What a record. And I quite like the way Johan Vipson describes this album as destructive and angry, but with a controlled melodic feel without. And I do love the Don Gilmore production myself as well on here. And I think at the time, this might surprise some people, but I had a brief period in my life where I was listening to rap and somewhat enjoying it, I would say. Probably this lasted maybe a maximum of a year that I was listening to rap. So to hear it in the rock context with, big, loud-sounding guitars, and this was one of the heavier albums I'd listened to up to that point, certainly, and it stoked my curiosity to listen to more metal and hard rock than I'd really had done much to that point, at least, and absolutely adored a lot of what I heard on this album. I can remember taking this album with me on holiday and listening to it non-stop. I think it was a holiday to Sorrento with my parents back in like 2001, the year after this came out, and I was just listening to this record non-stop. It's one of the few albums, even on this list that I'm talking about here, that I can still just listen to again and just never really tire of it. Even though I've heard In the Ends thousands of times, that's maybe the only song which maybe I've very slightly gotten tired with. But I think, Chester's Heart and Soul is in his singing on this record. Much Noda's rapping is super sharp. The atmosphere is perfect. And I kind of wish Linkin Park had used this sound more often in later records, where everything sounds so composite, everything sounds so well balanced, but loud and still very impacting. And it is a great record to this day. The impact score for Hybrid Theory. What do you think it's going to be, guys? What do you think it's going to be? It's going to be a 10 out of 10. This was my gateway into hard rock and metal, for goodness sake. It's never going to be less than a 10 because this was the album that really, really started it all for the Green Man as a Green team. Right, next up, we're talking about Fear Factory's 4th album, Digimortal. This came out on the 24th of April 2001. Actually, looking back, I occasionally forget that I loved this album, I must admit. So it's not going to have the same impact score as Hybrid Theory. It was the band going down a more radio-friendly route after, actually they had more success, I believe, with Obsolete that came before this in 98, and then Demanufacture before that. I think this didn't have as much success as maybe the band probably would have liked. Linchpin, though, did charts, I believe. That single was fantastic. I remember playing that single with on my parents' speaker system when they were out, and me and my friends had a blast listening to that, like probably about a dozen times, really loud on the speaker system. It is a really fun, really entertaining album for me. Like just a lot of fun to listen to. And yeah, I will give that one an impact score of a 9 out of 10 because I don't think it necessarily was as game-changing as Hybrid Theory, but I will say it kept me in my metal, it kept me in a lane, going towards really heavy stuff. Digimortal and Fear Factory generally are pretty extreme, and very, very sort of the Dino Cazares style of guitar playing is pretty relentless. So it was at that time quite unique to anything I'd ever heard before as well. And I loved it. Now, next up, we're talking about Soil. And what was their second album, Scars? I feel like this is a band that have been forgotten about quite a bit, actually, since they were big in the early 2000s with albums like this, like Scars. They were sort of a bit of an introduction to a groove sound. I feel like listening to Soil now, I kind of hear a little bit of Pantera in their sound, a sort of that American heavy metal style of the early 2000s. I wouldn't really say they were new metal as such, but they fit in with that image, I think, and that style in the early 2000s. I remember they released a couple of songs in conjunction with, I think, wrestling events. And I kind of got into them through that, I think. I think it was a couple of songs like Halo, maybe Breaking Me Down, Unreal. And they were good songs, solid tracks. I think it's a solid album. I mean, impact score wise, we're talking a 7 out of 10 for Soil Scars, I think. It was an album that had a big impact on me at the time. I loved it to death at the time. But over the years, it maybe hasn't quite had as much of a lasting impact as the likes of Digimortal and Hybrid Theory have, I would say. Now, album number 4, which was the debut album from this band. Of course, I posted about this recently on my community page. Finch's What It Is to Burn. Okay, and this is a really seminal record. A lot of people call it a landmark album for emo as well. In fact, Shezad Shivani of Chart Attack, he actually says that, he would compare Finch to bands like The Used and Glassjaw for their importance and influence on emo as a genre. This was kind of the early years of emo. This was just as it was kind of being born, if you like. And what's fascinating to me about Finch is I think they were really influenced by Deftones as well, and you can sort of hear that in their style. In a way, it makes me wonder if the true father of emo was actually Deftones. I wonder what Hector Children on a Catch would think of me saying that. But I mean, Deftones have been so influential on so many genres, I think, because they were unique and kind of their own thing. But yeah, I feel like there was definitely a bit of an influence of that kind of sound in this record too. I personally love tracks like, New Beginnings. Postscripts is the third song. That's a great song. What It Is to Burn is maybe my favourite. It's just really emotional, really, really takes you back. If there was a song that I feel represents 2002 as like a time capsule to that time, it feels like What It Is to Burn by Finch for me just transports me right back to 17-year-old me. Hearing and seeing all that was around me at that time suddenly comes back in a flash when I start listening to What It Is to Burn by Finch. It might surprise you, I'm not going to give this one a very high score for impact. I don't know if I even scored Soil Scars for impact. I think I might have done. That's a 7 out of 10. This one I'm going to give an 8 out of 10 because I didn't really go on to listen to much more emo after this. I was never that into emo. And sometimes I ask myself, is it ever too late to emo, as a kind of ongoing joke that I have ever since the Falling in Reverse, Is It That Bad episode we did a while back. But yeah, hopefully it's never too late to emo. And certainly when I listen to Finch's What It Is to Burn, I feel that emo at its strongest, and at its best too. What a great record. Next up, I'm going to talk about an album which, again, like Hybrid Theory, will not be a surprise to a single one of you that have followed me for a while. You'll be like, oh God, I know what's coming, because we're moving on to the 21st of May 2002. Brady Figel probably immediately knows what I'm about to talk about. Killswitch Engage, Alive or Just Breathing. Melodic metalcore, another kind of seminal record for that genre, for metalcore. I liked reading about this. So Mike Gitter, I'm not sure if that's how you say his name actually, a talent scout for Roadrunner apparently, played the album for other Roadrunner employees and stated that the feeling about this album was that this was something that touched upon classic metal but pulled it up through hardcore. And that's actually a pretty good description. For me, I'd almost say like I can hear a lot of Swedish melodic death metal influence on this record. I mean, in a way, I think that for me, whereas the reverse would have been for some people that went from melodic death metal perhaps to listening to metalcore, for me, metalcore was my kind of path towards melodic death metal, looking back now with the benefit of hindsight and everything. But I just think, I started to get into metalcore more, and I think by getting into metalcore, that helped me towards harsh vocals and understanding their sort of impact more, and what I love about harsh vocals in metal. And I think this album had such a massive impact on me. It also meant that I was listening to metal just generally much more. I was going out and buying CDs a lot more by this point because of albums like Alive or Just Breathing. I was talking about metal more with friends, I was kind of like fully embedded into the world of metal and hard rock by the point of Alive or Just Breathing. And I think Alive or Just Breathing completely just cemented my love of this style, of this sound, was so influential, so impacting on me. Like, you always know when a band really truly really truly impacts me when you remember the first time you discover them. This is the case with bands like Megadeth, Alice in Chains. For me, I remember the first time I discovered them, and I remember the first time with Killswitch, because I saw My Last Serenade airing on one of the TV channels, one of the music video channels. I think it was either MTV or Kerrang. I think it was Kerrang. And I saw My Last Serenade, and it changed. Just something in that moment just completely blew me away so much. The thrill. I mean, I wish I could go back in time and listen to My Last Serenade for the first time again and get that same thrill that you get when you have that moment the first time you listen to a song or an album, and it just completely like wows you. Like, you're like, it's like the first time probably tasting a meal you've never had before, or some analogy like that. You know what I mean? It's just amazing. So Killswitch Engage, Live or Just Breathing from May 2002. The impact score of this is going to be a 10 out of 10. And I think if I even reviewed this album today, I would review it with a 10 out of 10 as well. To me, it's just like the perfect melodic metalcore record. And, for that time in my life, when I was 17, I was an angsty teenager at this point, frustrated with certain things in my life. Was just, no doctor could have come up with something as good as this, I think, for that time of my life, right? Alive or Just Breathing was absolutely perfect. The cure for any angsty feelings for a teenager, for me, certainly at that point. So next up, I'm going to talk about Korn's Untouchables. Probably not as impacting as Alive or Just Breathing for me, I don't think, on a personal level, but still very impacting and still continuing my path into new metal and this kind of really heavy sound. This came out on the 11th of June 2002. I love the Beinhorn production on here, which I think Jonathan Davis described as a perfectionist approach that they had. I mean, it took them a long time to record the album. They were also, I think, as I remember reading, that Fieldy was having drug abuse problems prior to the recording of this, but, still obviously managed to record the album with Fieldy, and the results, I think, are stellar. I mean, I may be on a bit of an island saying this is my favourite Korn album. I've never really, I kind of really appreciate the earlier Korn records, but this one, it just hits so hard and is such a loud. I love Take a Look in the Mirror as well. That's why I chose it for Dark Horse Discs. I think that was actually my choice, thinking about it, because they're probably my two favourite Korn albums. They're kind of basic in a way, but they are so well delivered, and I love just the kind of loud, bassy Korn hooks. Their hooks are really great. They know how to make memorable songs, and Jonathan Davis, his unique kind of vocals are something else as well, fit in so well with their kind of like eerie, dark, urban kind of feel of music. And I've always felt Jonathan Davis's vocals just fit that Korn sound so well. It was like they were meant to be Korn with that style. I just love them on their sort of heavy, untethered, unfiltered, just really loud, wild sounds of Untouchables and Take a Look in the Mirror. So my impact score is still going to be a 9 out of 10. I think this album still had a very big impact on me back in the day. And I will say I still go back to this one quite a bit. So that's partly why I've given this such a high score for impact, because I think I still go back to that record quite a lot. Next up, we're talking about an artist whose overall impact on me was massive. He inspired me even to pick up the guitar, I would say, and to continue to play it. That is Joe Satriani. Now, I could never play guitar quite to the... I'm worried people will think I'm trying to say I can play guitar like such. I can't. There's no way. But Satriani was hugely influential to me on the music taste front, really, because I got into... Eventually, what I'm going to talk about in part 2 is classic metal, classic rock, as one of the big, the big things I was listening to from about 2005 onwards, right? And Satch was a bit of a pathway to that for me, because he sort of, I kind of got into Steve Vai. I kind of discovered these legendary guitarists and their connections to other bands as well, which kind of led me down a bit of a rabbit hole with starting to discover classic rock too. And so Satch, I kind of credit him a bit with that and Is There Love in Space, this 2004 album, which I haven't even mentioned the title of yet, it's Is There Love in Space, released on the 13th of April 2004. Not the album that truly impacted me from Joe. I think that The Extremist, Surfing with the Alien, and Flying in a Blue Dream were the three albums from his classic era from the late 80s, early 90s period that really influenced me the most. But I've chosen this because it came out in that era I'm talking about here. And it was exciting for me at that time because it was an album from Joe Satriani released just after I'd gotten into his music. So it was good. It was a timely release from Satch. And I really enjoy this album. I will say, I think that if I were to actually score it as an album review, I'd just give it like a 6 or a 7 out of 10 because it is a bit of a mixed bag. There are tracks on here I'm not so keen on, like Hands in the Air and Lifestyle. I think Joe's kind of 2000s era, he likes to use crowd chants quite a bit, and I'm not a fan of crowd chants in rock and metal. And there are exceptions. Maybe Iron Maiden with some of their sort of crowd chant type choruses, but yeah, I'm not generally not a fan of crowd chants. So, but you have stuff on here also that is some of his top work for me, like Searching is an incredible use of I think the whammy pedal, and what he does with that in that song is amazing. Souls of Distortion, I think Up in Flames is one of my favourite tracks from Joe Satriani, all time favourites as well. So I'm going to say the influence of this was 8 out of 10 because it came out at the right time in my life when I was getting into Joe anyway, and Joe Satriani's kind of discography up to this point. And at the time, as I say, he was hugely influential on my guitar playing, my decision to play and continue to learn to play the guitar. So it brings us to our last album, which I think is probably my most surprising pick, but one I'm very excited to talk about still. This is Avril Lavigne, Under My Skin, from 19th of May 2004. The first time I heard about Avril Lavigne was actually through my sister, who kind of got me, I heard her debut album through her really, because I could hear it coming through my wall, the wall of my bedroom at the time. I will say, I'll be honest with everyone here, I'm still not a massive Avril fan really, but I do really like this album, and I still really appreciate this one from 2004, Under My Skin. Carly Carioli of Blender magazine, I like what she says that with this album, that she has deepened and darkened her sound without sacrificing her platinum-plated melodies, presumably, that were present also on her first record. And I think because this is Avril's most metal album and her darkest album, maybe that's why I love it the most, because I love heavy, I love dark, I love stuff that leans more into that kind of styles generally. Not always, but I do like this Avril record a lot. Kind of at the peak of her writing on this album too, and I kind of like, I've sort of, there's some of her albums like after this I kind of find hit or miss with me, but this one I do still appreciate. And I would say I'd only give this an impact score of a 7 out of 10 now, because I think, as time has gone on, like I say, I'm not a big Avril fan. I don't seek out Avril's music actively as such when she releases new albums, I would say, to be honest. But I think this album did have an influence on me in terms of pop punk, somewhat getting into a little bit more of that at that time. And just kind of, good to see, I guess, a woman in that scene as well, kind of being a pioneer for, women in this genre too. And actually kind of like, seeing that for me at that time anyway, at that age when I was 19, was kind of like, it was something that was a little bit new to me anyway in that time, just to kind of explain a bit more context too. But yeah, I'd give this an impact score of a 7 out of 10 for me personally, just because, as I say, I didn't really go on to listen to a hell of a lot in this style afterwards, or from Avril, but I do dig this record quite a bit. That's it. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you're new to my channel, do drop a like and a sub. It supports everything that I do here on The Green Man. And yeah, until next time, until part 2, I'm going to be talking about, as I say, 2005 to 2011, which will be talking about my journey into classic rock and metal, but also prog too. And of course, probably my all-time favourite genre is actually prog to this day. So it's going to be an interesting one to talk about, and what albums really kind of got me into that world of classic rock and prog, particularly in that era. So until next time, everyone, hope you enjoyed the video. And from me, it is, as always, bye for now.